The shower was my sanctuary, the one place the noise couldn't reach me. Not the actual physical noise. Here, in this apartment I shared with my best friend from high school, there was only the gentle hum of the water heater and the purring of my cat, Luna, who sat on the closed toilet lid like a tiny furry sentinel. The noise was in my head. A ceaseless, chaotic symphony of shouted curses, slammed doors, a baby's endless, piercing scream, and the low, agonized tremor in my mother's voice that never truly left, even in her silences. I let the scalding water beat against my shoulders, a pain I could control, and I cried. It was the strangest thing. I was, objectively, the happiest I'd ever been. I had safety. I had quiet. I had a life that was, for the first time, mine. And yet, in the steam, the grief would rise, a viscous black tide for the girl I'd never been allowed to be. My mother called it holding a grudge. She called it going. "She's your sister," she'd plead, her voice fraying at the edges like worn cloth. "After what was done to her, you have to." But some doors need to be sealed shut, bolted, bricked over. For me, the door to my older sister, Elise, was one of them. She was a ghost, a malevolent spirit whose haunting had shaped every corner of my. My mother believed in the power of forgiveness, in the redemptive arc, in the wounded bird that would one day heal and fly. I believed in survival, and surviving Elise meant declaring her dead to me. My story, our story, doesn't start with my hatred. It starts in the poisoned soil where it took root. I was 4 years old when the world fractured. Elise was 13, a vibrant, sharp-tongued girl with a laugh that could ignite a room. Then, a family friend, a man whose face I've mercifully forgotten, stole that light in the most violent way possible. He raped her. That is the foundational trauma, the seismic event my mother points to as the origin of all our suffering. And she is not wrong. But an earthquake doesn't last 17 years. The devastation it leaves behind, the unstable ground, the constant aftershocks, those become their own separate. I would huddle at the top of the stairs, a forgotten doll in my arms, watching as she screamed at our mother, her words ugly and sharp as broken glass. I saw her shove her, once against the refrigerator, the dull thud reverberating through the linoleum and up into my bones. My father, a quiet man already buckling under the weight of it all, seemed to shrink, becoming a ghost in his own home. We began to run. That's what it felt like, a fugitive family, constantly packing boxes, loading a U-Haul in the dead of night, chasing the mirage of a fresh start. 4 times before I turned 10. New town, new school, new desperate hope that here, Elise would be different. She'd be the girl she was before. But she carried the chaos within her, and within weeks, she'd find its mirror. The wrong crowd, the dealer at the new school, the boyfriend with hollow eyes. Our lives constricted around her illness. We stopped eating at local restaurants after our food was deliberately contaminated by people she'd wronged. My small treasures, a music box from my grandmother, my meager savings from tooth fairy quarters, would disappear, sold, or the 2008 market crash was the final brutal blow we couldn't absorb. My parents had poured every spare cent into court fees, rehab programs that never took, moving costs. There was no cushion. We lost the house. For 6 months, we lived in a borrowed camper, then a motel room that smelled of mildew and despair. I was 12. My childhood officially ended in a room with 2 double beds where I learned to sleep through the sounds of my parents crying and my mother my beautiful, fierce mother, began to die. The official diagnosis was early onset Parkinson's, a cruel twist of genetics or fate. But I knew, in the way children know things in their gut, that it was the stress. It was Elise. At 45, her hands developed a faint, constant tremor. Her vibrant energy leached away, replaced by a terrifying fragility. She was on the brink for 5 years, a whisper away from leaving us completely. And through it all, she never stopped fighting for her. When Elise was 21, she got pregnant. The father was one of the abusive ones, a man whose love left bruises. The baby, a girl she named Chloe, was born screaming, a raw, agonized sound that was more than infant colic. She was born addicted to meth. Her scream became the soundtrack of our lives for 2 years. 16 hours a day, a ceaseless, piercing wail of neurological distress. The only reprieves were when exhaustion or hunger forced her into a fitful sleep. Elise, predictably, vanished into the chaos of her own making, and Chloe landed in my mother's failing arms. And mine. I became a miniature mother at 13. I changed diapers, learned to make formula with shaking hands, walked the floors for hours with a baby who could not be comforted. I did homework to the sound of that scream. My own childhood needs, friends, hobbies, silence, felt like absurd, extravagant fantasies. My little sister, Mia, 7 years younger, clung to me like a life raft. We were a ship of the damned. Chloe was 3 when the system, in its infinite, misguided wisdom, forced us to give her back. Elise had another baby by then, with a different man. This one, Lily's father, was different, a gentle soul with haunted eyes, self-medicating a severe mental illness. He tried, in his broken way. He'd end up in rehab, and to this day he asks after the girls. Elise, however, descended further. Their apartments were monuments to neglect. I'd go with my mother on her daily missions of mercy, carrying bags of groceries into squalor that would sting my eyes. The floor was a topography of trash. Fast food wrappers, filthy clothes, empty cans. You had to pick your path to avoid soiled diapers. The smell was a physical presence, stale smoke, sour milk, and despair. My mother, her Parkinson's making every movement a trial, would clean while Elise slept or was gone, her face a mask of heartbreak. She was the only reason those little girls ate. Elise cycled back into our lives, parking a dilapidated camper behind our house. She had a new boyfriend and a new promise: sobriety. The condition? We take Chloe. He doesn't like other men's kids, she said with a shrug, as if discussing a disliked piece of furniture. She signed away her rights, a transaction of breathtaking coldness. Chloe, now a quiet, wary 5-year-old, moved into my bedroom. I was her anchor, her bedtime story reader, the one who soothed the nightmare she couldn't articulate. My mother's health was a roller coaster. Some days she could barely get out of bed. So the weight settled on me. I held the family together, cooking, cleaning, managing Mia's tears, translating the world for Chloe. We ran again, not for Elise this time, but from her. We moved 2 states over, a desperate bid for a border, a barrier. We took Chloe, now legally my mother's, and Mia, and for 1 breathless month we dared to hope. The air felt lighter. The silence was a gift. It lasted until the phone call. Elise had been arrested. Lily, her second, was in foster care. The image of my 2-year-old niece with her father's soft eyes, lost in the system, shattered my mother. She fought, got Lily, brought her home. The court, obsessed with reunification, again gave Elise a path back. She followed us, a storm cloud on the horizon. The girls were legally returned to her. She took them and vanished. 3 weeks of silence. Then the call from the school district. The girls hadn't been in class for a week. What followed was a descent into a special kind of hell. My mother, a woman who could barely hold a spoon steady, transformed into a force of nature. She drove to every flop house, every known drug den, fueled by pure terror. I stayed home with Mia, paralyzed by a fear so thick I could taste it. She found them in a meth house on the edge of a town known for nothing. The police report, which I read later in a detached haze, filled in the details my mother could only sob out. Lily, then 3, had been crying from hunger. Someone, Elise or another resident, it was never clear, had silenced her by shooting her through the foot with a metal BB gun. My mother found her curled in a corner, caked in dirt and blood, too exhausted to whimper. That moment, for me, was the point of no return. The before and the after. The image of that small, bleeding foot, of my niece's trauma inflicted for the crime of needing food, scorched away any last remnant of sisterly feeling. It wasn't just addiction then. It wasn't just the fallout of her own abuse. It was a profound moral rot. She had allowed her child to be the hospital, the custody battle, the legal guardianship. It all passed in a blur of grim resolution. My mother, aged a decade in a month, became the girl's rock. I left for college a few months later, a suitcase full of secondhand clothes and a head full of ghosts. My escape lasted precisely one night. That first night in my dorm, a sterile little box that promised normalcy, my phone rang. It was Mia, her voice tiny and fractured. Elise had shown up, high and raging, demanding the girls back. It had escalated. There had been a physical fight. My mother, in a surge of adrenaline that defied her disease, had defended her home and her grandchildren. But after, in the terrible quiet, the cost had come due. The tremor in her hands became a violent quaking. The weight of decades of betrayal, fear, and fury crashed down. Mia found her sitting in the dark, my father's old service revolver in her lap. She hadn't pulled the trigger, but she had traced its cold shape with her fingers, contemplating the peace it offered. I spent my first night of freedom on the phone, talking my mother back from the ledge, my own dream of a new life crumbling to ash around me. The guilt was immediate and annihilating. I should have been there. I was always the one who held things together. I didn't last the year. The trauma I carried made me a magnet for more. My roommate, a girl who seemed charming at first, revealed herself to be a master of psychological warfare, her manipulations poking expertly at my deepest wounds. I had no defenses. I'd never learned how to have a healthy friendship, let alone navigate a covertly abusive one. I'd attended 13 different schools, moved over 20 times. My entire relational blueprint was one of impermanence and crisis. I unraveled. My own suicide attempt was less a decision than a culmination, a silent white flag raised against a world that felt perpetually, unsurvivably hostile. I came home, not to my parents' house, but to this apartment with my one true friend from that chaotic high school era. I got Luna, who teaches me about quiet, consistent love every day. I work a solitary job. I'm learning, painstakingly, how to be a person, how to trust, how to exist without the... And through it all, my mother gently, persistently, tries to bridge the uncrossable sea between me and Elise. "She's sick, baby," she says. What happened to her? I know what happened to her. I finally screamed during our last conversation about it, the words ripping out of a place I usually kept locked. It was horrible, and it was evil, and it was not her fault. But Mom, look at the wake of it. Look at Chloe, who still jumps at loud noises. Look at Lily, who has the scar on her foot. Look at you. Look at me. I am 21 years old, and I'm just now learning how to make a friend. I cry in the shower because it's the only place I feel safe enough to feel it all. She doesn't get to use that monster as a pardon for 17 years of monsters she created. Her choices became her own somewhere in there, and she chose again and again and again to hurt us, to let her babies be hurt. My mother was quiet for a long time. To not forgive her, she said softly, is to let her hurt you forever. But she was wrong. My declaration that Elise is dead to me isn't about holding on to hurt. It's a radical, surgical act of self-preservation. It is the amputation of a gangrenous limb to save the body. The grief is real, for the sister I lost at 4, for the childhood I never had, for the normal, uncomplicated love that is impossible for us. I mourn her, but the woman she became is a toxin my system can no longer. My mother's love is a deep, wide river, powerful enough to try and carry all of us, even the one who tries to drown the others. My love, now, is a small, carefully tended garden. It has room for my mother, with her tremors and her bottomless heart, for Mia, who is growing into a fierce, funny young woman, for Chloe and Lily, who call me auntie and whose laughter is the sweetest sound I know, for my friend, and for Luna. It is a fragile new ecosystem. To let Elise back in, even as a concept requiring forgiveness, would be to salt the earth. So, am I overreacting? Am I going too far? I think of the 4-year-old on the stairs, the 12-year-old in the homeless motel, the 13-year-old walking a screaming baby, the 20-year-old on the phone hearing the hollow click of a gun being considered. I think of the scar on a 3-year-old's foot. No. My mother's love is a deep, wide river, powerful enough to try and carry all of us, even the one who tries to drown the others. My love, now, is a small, carefully tended garden. It has room for my mother, with her tremors and her bottomless heart, for Mia, who is growing into a fierce, funny young woman, for Chloe and Lily, who call me auntie and whose laughter is the sweetest sound I know, for my friend, and for Luna. It is a fragile new ecosystem. To let Elise back in, even as a concept requiring forgiveness, would be to salt the earth. So, am I overreacting? Am I going too far? I think of the 4-year-old on the stairs, the 12-year-old in the homeless motel, the 13-year-old walking a screaming baby, the 20-year-old on the phone hearing the hollow click of a gun being considered. I think of the scar on a 3-year-old's foot. No, this isn't a grudge. It's a border. It's a line drawn in the sand of my soul saying, you come no further. Your destruction ends here. My mother may see a door that needs to be left open, but I have lived in the hurricane that blows through that door for 17 years. I have finally found a quiet room, and I am learning, slowly, how to breathe in it. I am not barricading the door out of hate. I am locking it, at long last, out of love. For the girls we were, and for the women, Chloe, Lily, Mia, and I, have a chance to become. The story doesn't get to end with her anymore. It ends with us, picking up the pieces and building something new, something quiet, something ours. And that is not going too far. That is just far enough, finally, to be safe. So that's my story. That's my line in the sand. It wasn't drawn from a place of hate, but from a desperate, final act of love for myself and for the family I could still save. But I want to hear from you now. What would you have done in my shoes? Was cutting her off the right call, or is my mother right? Was I going too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to make an impossible choice to protect your peace, hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow. And if you want more stories about setting boundaries, survival, and the tough roads people walk to find their own version of peace, make sure you subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a new video.